As an Uber driver, have you ever wondered if long-distance fares are worth your time and money? That's the big question we're pondering today. It's a topic that's generated a lot of buzz, and for good reason. After all, we're talking about your livelihood. Picture this. You're cruising around your local area, when suddenly, a long-distance fare pops up on your app. You glance at the potential earnings, and they look good. But then you start to think about the time it will take, the miles you'll put on your vehicle, and the possibility of returning home empty-handed. It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? This is a reality that many Uber drivers face on a daily basis. It's a balancing act between the lure of a big payout and the practicalities of operating efficiently. So, is it really worth it? Let's dig deeper into this issue. Scene script. Hear it straight from those who experience it daily, our Uber drivers. Let's dive into some real-life experiences. We've talked to a handful of drivers who've been in the game for a while, and their insights are as varied as the miles they've driven. First up, we have Jack, a veteran Uber driver from San Francisco. Jack says, long-distance fares can be a real jackpot. I once had a fare that took me from downtown San Francisco all the way to Sacramento. The fare, plus the generous tip, made it totally worth my time. But Jack also cautions, it's not always sunshine and rainbows. I've had instances where I've driven a long way out, only to find myself in an area with barely any ride requests. It's like being stranded on a deserted island. Then we have Lisa, an Uber driver from New York City. Lisa has a different take. I prefer sticking to the city, she says. Long-distance rides mean less frequency, and that can really add up. Plus there's the wear and tear on my car to consider. It's not just about the money you make, it's also about the money you spend. On the other hand, we have Sam from Chicago who seems to have found a middle ground. I take it on a case-by-case basis, Sam explains. If it's a slow day, a long-distance fare can be a blessing. But if it's busy, I might pass. The key is to know your market and adapt. But let's not forget about Sarah from Miami who says, I love long-distance fares, they give me a chance to explore new areas and meet interesting passengers. And the money? It's usually pretty good. As you can see, these experiences paint a diverse picture. It's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. Some drivers love the adventure and potential earnings of long-distance fares, while others prefer the steady rhythm of shorter, more frequent rides. As we've heard, it's not all black and white, there are various factors that come into play. Now let's take a closer look at the pros and cons of long-distance fares. First off, the pros. The most obvious benefit is the higher fare rate. You're paid per mile and per minute, so a long-distance trip can really boost your earnings. Plus, passengers are often more inclined to tip generously for a long-distance trip, especially if you've provided a smooth and comfortable ride. There's also the potential for interesting conversations and a chance to meet people you wouldn't otherwise encounter. And let's not forget there's always a certain thrill in journeying to unknown destinations, and long fares can often provide this delightful sense of adventure. But every coin has two sides, right? So let's flip it over and consider the cons. The most glaring downside is the time spent on the road. Long-distance trips can eat up a lot of your driving time, and there's no guarantee of a fare on your return trip. That's time you could have spent picking up new riders in your local area. Then there's the wear and tear on your vehicle. More miles mean more maintenance, more frequent oil changes, and the more likely it is you'll need to replace parts sooner than expected. This can add up, eating into your profits. And let's not forget about the cost of fuel. Long trips will naturally consume more gas, and if prices are high, or if your car isn't particularly fuel efficient, this can significantly impact your earnings. Finally, there's the potential for increased fatigue. Long trips can be tiring, especially if they involve heavy traffic or require intense concentration for extended periods. It's important to consider your own well-being and safety when deciding whether to accept long fares. Clearly there are both benefits and drawbacks, but how do they stack up against each other? We'll delve into this in the next scene where we start crunching the numbers, so stick around, the answer may surprise you. It's time to get down to the nitty-gritty, the financial aspect. So let's imagine two scenarios. In the first, you're an Uber driver who accepts a long-distance fare, let's say a 100-mile journey. In the second, you're the same driver, but you opt for 10 shorter rides, each about 10 miles long. In the long-distance scenario, you might earn significantly more from that single fare. Sounds great, right? But hold your horses, we need to factor in some additional costs. Firstly, there's fuel. Your car may average about 25 miles per gallon, so a 100-mile journey would require around 4 gallons of gas. Now if gas is averaging around $3 per gallon, that's $12 off your earnings. Next, let's consider car maintenance. The IRS estimates that it costs about 58 cents per mile to operate a vehicle, including gas, maintenance, and depreciation. So for 100 miles, we're looking at $58. Subtract the $12 for gas, and you've got $46 for maintenance and depreciation. Now, in the short fares scenario, you're still covering the same total distance, so fuel and maintenance costs remain the same. However, the earnings are a different story. With shorter rides, you're likely to have more downtime between fares, which means less income for your time. But wait, there's another twist. With long-distance fares, you might end up far from populated areas, which could mean a long, unpaid trip back to where you can find more passengers. That's extra fuel and extra wear and tear on your car. So, what's the verdict? It's not as straightforward as it first seemed, right? While long-distance fares can offer a higher upfront payment, the costs associated with these trips can eat into your profits. Meanwhile, shorter rides could mean more downtime, but also the potential for more consistent earnings and less risk of being stranded far from home. It seems the numbers tell a complex story. Let's hear from our drivers again for their final thoughts. Back to the drivers who live this reality every day. What are their final thoughts? We've heard from a diverse group of drivers, each with their unique perspective on the long-distance fare question. They've been gracious enough to share their strategies and advice not as a definitive guide, but as a starting point for other drivers to develop their own approach. One driver, John, shared his philosophy of seeing long-distance fares as an adventure. He enjoys the change of scenery and the opportunity to explore new areas. He believes that the key is to maintain a positive mindset and to not let the distance intimidate you. He says, if you see every long trip as a potential adventure, it's less about the fare and more about the experience. Contrastingly, Sarah, another seasoned driver, prefers to stick closer to home. She values her time and believes that shorter trips provide a more consistent income. She advises, know your local area well and maximize your earnings within that space. It's not always about how far you can go, but how efficiently you can work. Then there's Mike, who takes a more analytical approach. He considers factors like traffic, the time of day, and potential return fares before deciding on a long haul. He suggests, always weigh the pros and cons. Sometimes a long-distance fare might seem lucrative, but you have to consider the return journey and other variables. In essence, their strategies are as varied as their personalities. Some embrace the unknown, some stick to what they know, and some make calculated decisions. But they all agree on one thing. Driving for Uber is not just about the destination or the distance, it's about the journey and the choices they make along the way. In the end, it seems there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It comes down to each driver's individual circumstances and decisions. So, long-distance fares, a boon or a bane for Uber drivers? We've taken this journey together, exploring the realities, the pros and cons, and the numbers behind long-distance Uber fares. We've heard from drivers who have been in the thick of it, sharing their real-world experiences. This is a complex issue with many variables at play. Factors like time of day, location, fuel costs, and personal circumstances can tip the scales in different directions. It's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Ultimately, the decision to take on long-distance fares falls to each individual driver. It's about weighing the potential profits against the potential costs, both in terms of time and money. It requires thought, calculation, and sometimes a bit of trial and error. As we've seen, the answer to our big question isn't straightforward. But with thoughtful consideration, each driver can make the choice that's right for them.